What if the richest man in history didn't just travel to Europe but conquered it? How would the world have changed? Mansa Musa, emperor of Mali from 1307 to 1337, is regarded by many historians as the richest person ever. His personal wealth adjusted to inflation would be way over $400 billion. In 1334, at the height of his power, Mansa set out on a pilgrimage more than 4,000 miles to the Mecca. To protect him on this dangerous journey, he assembled what might have been the largest army in history, 60,000 men strong. And while there is some debate about exactly how far Musa's forces got, before turning back due to disease, there is no doubt that they made it to the outskirts of Cairo, the capital of Egypt, where Musa stayed for several months. According to the accounts of Arab chroniclers, Musa lavished gold on all passers-by, and though his own forces were Muslim, he also showed great respect to Christians and Jews. In fact, during his life, Mansa was known to be tolerant of other religions. So what if instead of making a pilgrimage to Mecca, Musa decided to conquer Europe? So let's imagine, what if Mansa Musa conquered Europe? To really explore this alternate history properly, we need to take a moment to establish the historical stage. Let's begin with Europe in the early 14th century. At the time, much of Europe was still dominated by feudalism. England had recently emerged victorious from the 100 Years' War with France, and both were ruled by powerful monarchs. While the Holy Roman Empire stretched across much of Central and Northern Europe, fragmented rule meant that there was little cohesion within the empire. There were plenty of independent duchies, bishoprics, and counties, as well as the rise of powerful Italian merchant republics like Venice, Genoa, and Florence. This fragmentation would prove crucial to the Mansa's invasion. Meanwhile, back in Africa, the Mali Empire was vast, stretching from the Atlantic coast of West Africa deep into the heart of the continent. Under the rule of the Keita dynasty, the empire's wealth came primarily from gold and salt mines, as well as control of the trans-Saharan trade routes. This wealth allowed Mansa Musa to assemble a massive army. But could it conquer Europe? With an army of 60,000 men, Mansa would have easily defeated the small kingdoms of Europe. But to conquer the entire continent, he would need to bring along supplies to sustain his troops for years. Since Mali did not have a navy, Mansa's army would have to trek across North Africa and then through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean Sea. From there, he could choose many possible routes into Europe. Perhaps he invades the Iberian Peninsula, pushing north from the south. Or maybe he lands in North Africa and marches east to Constantinople, sailing down the coast of the Black Sea to invade the Italian peninsula. Regardless of the route, Mansa would face significant obstacles. Along the way, his massive army would be difficult to feed and water. Disease would likely kill more men than any battle. Rival powers in North Africa, such as the Egyptian Mamluk Sultanate, would surely resist the Mansa's advance. Not to mention the fragmented nature of medieval European kingdoms would mean that, even if the Mansa's army managed to reach the heart of the continent, he would have to contend with numerous small but fiercely independent states. However, if he could somehow overcome these obstacles, the impact on Europe would be immediate. The kingdoms of Europe would be utterly shocked by the arrival of the massive foreign army, not to mention the sheer wealth of the Mansa himself. Many smaller kingdoms would likely submit to the Mansa's rule immediately. Larger kingdoms would almost certainly resist, which would lead to devastating battles and the deaths of many nobles. The Mansa would likely use superior numbers and discipline to wear down European armies. And while knights would be formidable opponents, the sheer number of Muslims would likely ensure victory. After all, Mali warriors were said to fight in heavy armor and wielded longbows, maces, and swords, as well as spears and shields. They also used catapults and other siege weapons. Furthermore, the Mansa's army included elephant riders who proved useful in breaking enemy formations. Once inside the cities of Europe, the Muslims would likely be shocked by the level of wealth, but also the filth and disease. Medieval European cities were notoriously dirty and unsanitary, which led to rampant disease and high death rates. Despite the shock, the Muslims would quickly adapt and make the cities more sanitary. They would also likely face resistance from the local populations, especially after rumors spread about the harsh treatment of conquered peoples under Mali rule. However, with the help of local converts to Islam, the Malians would eventually prevail. Cities like Rome, Paris, and London would likely fall under Mali rule, and Mansa would force the local nobility to convert to Islam. While some nobles would surely die resisting, most would likely bend the knee to avoid the bloodshed. The peasants of Europe would also be impacted by the conquest. While the Mansa was known for being generous to those who submitted, he was also not above punishing those who resisted. While the Mansa's rule would almost certainly improve the lives of many Europeans, it would also bring about many changes. Following the conquest, Mansa would likely force the adoption of Arabic numerals and the metric system to facilitate trade. Most importantly, however, the Mansa would undoubtedly try to spread Islam throughout Europe. This would be done through peaceful means, such as building mosques and madrasas, but also through forceful conversions. Over time, this would lead to the spread of Islam throughout much of the continent. Furthermore, the influx of African gold into the European economy would likely cause prices to skyrocket. This would lead to new centers of wealth and power emerging in Europe, possibly even leading to the Renaissance starting earlier. In fact, the entire course of European history would likely be altered. With the introduction of Islamic numerals, scientific texts, and architectural styles, the Crusades would likely never have happened. Europe would have become a melting pot of cultures, and the dominance of Christianity would have been challenged. Furthermore, the increased trade with Africa would have brought about new scientific discoveries and technologies to the continent. This, in turn, may have led to the scientific revolution starting earlier. As centuries passed, the effects of the conquest would continue to be felt. Universities would be founded modeled after those in the Islamic world. Architecture would blend African, Arabic, and European styles. Trade would flourish and cities would grow. Eventually, European nations would become known for their scholarship, science, and trade. Instead of going to Africa for knowledge, Europeans would come to Africa to learn. In fact, African empires would become the new superpowers of the world. It would be an unrecognizable world compared to the one we live in. However, what if Mansa Musa had chosen to do more than just conquer Europe? What if he had also enslaved the population? Well, that's a video for another day. Now let's finish up our alternate history. Now that Mansa Musa had conquered Europe, the rest of the world would also feel the ripple effects. The Americas would remain untouched, but Asia and the Middle East would be impacted in big ways. Without the plague to decimate the population, Asia would continue to grow in population, leading to even more pressure on resources. This would lead to earlier conflicts between European and Asian powers, potentially even leading to World War I starting earlier. Furthermore, with Africa controlling the vast majority of European trade routes, they would have tremendous leverage over the continent. This would lead to increased tensions and conflicts between African and Asian powers. And without the Industrial Revolution occurring in Europe, it's unlikely that African empires would have developed the technology to match those of Asia. As a result, Africa would likely continue to dominate European trade and politics. In fact, it's quite possible that colonialism would be completely reversed. Instead of European powers colonizing Africa, African powers would be colonizing Europe. But ultimately, it's impossible to say exactly how the rest of the world would have been impacted. What is certain, however, is that Mansa Musa's legacy would have been cemented as a true global conqueror. No longer would he just be known as the richest man in history, but as the man who conquered Europe. Mansa's statue would be erected in every major city in Europe, and his face would adorn every coin minted in the continent. The world we live in today would be unrecognizable. Modern Europe would likely be a poor continent ruled over by African empires. Modern America would likely never exist, as European colonization of the New World would have been impossible. Science, culture, and trade would all be centered around Africa, and it's quite possible that West Africa would be the dominant superpower of the world. This alternate history shows us just how powerful the butterfly effect can be. Just one change, Mansa Musa conquering Europe, and everything changes. We should all remember the lessons of history because things can change so quickly and unexpectedly. So thanks for watching.